Hey, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Steve Lois. I've been in this recruiting space for about 23 or 24 years now, and this is going to be the first of a long series of videos and discussions to help you better understand what's happening in the industry. I mean, recruiting continues to change, especially in this economy that we live in today. 4.3% unemployment, the lowest it's been since about 2001. The question has to be asked in this, though. Does the candidate do candidates buy positions the same way they did in the past? Do they think the same way? Do they actually have the same behaviors they did 20 or even 10 years ago? And I think we know the answer is no. Most of you would agree that candidate behaviors are totally different today than they were in the past. But there's one big question. Why? Why are candidates changing? The way they look at employers, the way they look at recruiters, the way they look at opportunities, because it's all changed. It's actually a very simple answer. I mean, if you think about it, 20 years ago, what was the bridge between companies and opportunities? It was the recruiter. We were the one that communicated the position. We were the primary method of communication about the organization, about the culture in the organization, what it was like to work for that company. But let's fast forward to where we are today, because things have changed. Now in our age and our time, and with the power of technology and the ease of the internet, especially things like social media, we live in a completely different era. Why? The answer is because candidates know more about your company, about your products or services, about the perceived culture, about the reviews of your organization, who your competitors are, how long you've been in business, maybe even your turnover rates, maybe even your compensation. They know everything there is to know about you simply by doing a Google search. And let's think about it, right? Because of this power, the power of technology, they no longer feel like they're being manipulated or like they want to be manipulated by recruiters. Because if they're good, if the candidate is good, in this economy, they have a ton of choices. I mean, let's take a developer, for example. A developer can go online, they can look at companies by location, by the skill sets that they're recruiting for. She can look at reputation of that organization, the projects that they're working on. And the reality is she can also leverage her own social media network, reach out to people that used to work at that company, that currently work at that company. Look at things like Glassdoor to see what the reviews are about that company. For the most part, that developer can protect themselves from recruiters who are just in it for themselves. Look, if candidates feel manipulated today or pushed by the recruiter, I mean, think about the power of the internet. She can go online and tell a few thousand of her closest friends on Facebook, on LinkedIn. She can tweet a message. There's a number of things that she can do. And ultimately, her friends can do the same, and they can share that message, ultimately making it difficult for the recruiter's ability to recruit. I mean, too many candidates now see recruiters, this is just like salespeople, as the typical salesperson, that used car sales approach, that person that you think always has this alternative motive for everything you say or do. They feel like that the recruiter wants to manipulate them in a role because they're always closing. And that's what you and I were taught to do, that you're going to overpromise and ultimately the company is going to underdeliver. Look, as a recruiter, this is what you're going up against with every candidate you speak to, every day, every week, and ultimately every month that you're doing this. So the question is, it comes down to this. Do we approach candidates the same way we did 10 or 15 years ago today? Do we keep using some of the old same techniques that maybe somebody who was recruiting 20 years ago and hasn't recruited in 20 years is still teaching you today? Or do we have to change the way in which we approach our candidates? Look, the economy has changed. We've all agreed on that. Access to information has changed. Candidate buying behaviors have changed. And it's no longer about being the hardcore closer. It's really got to be about creating real value for the candidate. I mean, in the past, when I got into selling and recruiting, I was taught the ABC method, right? always be closing. Do whatever you need to do in order to get your candidate to the end at the fastest way, the lowest cost. But over time, as we've already talked about, the economy has changed. Things are becoming much more difficult. It's not about taking them right to the close because they have options. Look, recruiting or selling is more than just pitching an opportunity, pitching an organization. As professional recruiters, we need to start creating a frame that helps candidates make decisions along the process. We've got to change the lens that we look at things through. I mean, salespeople used to look at everything as money. If I close this deal, I get dollars. But we need to change that because recruiters do the same thing. It's all about closing my job no matter what happens. But we need to change our view from that to decisions. Our job is to help candidates make decisions. Sometimes they start with little ones, but we've got to understand and change our framework from always be closing to always be helping them make decisions. I mean, decisions in sales equals cash. Decisions in recruiting ultimately equals cash if you're on the outside, or it means the right fit internally if you're on the inside. When I talk about this, though, the question is, how valuable is that decision you're trying to get the candidate to make to you? Are you investing the right time? Are you investing potentially the right dollars? Or are you just trying to get them down to the end to make that really big decision to say, yes, I'm joining your organization? That may be the end goal, but have you taken them through the process the right way? If that decision is valuable, where are you investing to get them to make that actual decision? Take a step back from the recruiting process you go through right now, and let's look at it in terms of this three-step process that I call target, tour, and tilt. And number one is going to make sense to you, this idea of a target. You know what's the big decision you want them to make. We know we want to get this candidate to ultimately join our organization. But we can't just focus on that end game. We've got to be able to look and re-engineer where we're going from there. If the end game is that they join your organization today, what are the steps that ultimately lead up to that? And are we investing in each of those steps? We spend a ton of money investing in sourcing. We spend a ton of money in investing in getting them to that point. But it seems when we get into the actual recruiting process that we stop investing our time and we stop investing our dollars. So once we know the target, it's called taking them on a tour. It's what I call this decision tour. Introducing them to the opportunity. This will sound familiar. Inviting them to engage so you can uncover the needs. Filling the needs so that you ultimately resonate with that particular candidate in where they are today, and then getting a commitment or gaining their commitment to move on to the next step in the decision-making process. But in order for all this to work, we have to understand this concept of the tilt. So we've gone ultimately from the target, we know what we want them to do, we've taken them on this decision-making tour, but I want you to really understand what I mean by this concept known as the tilt. You may think of this as pre-closing your candidate, but I want to take it one step further than that, because the tilt is all about creating momentum in decisions. And the more important the decision, the more time, the more money, the more effort in a real sales process or a real recruiting process that we need to go through in order to get there. So let's start with the target. Ultimately, here is the big target of what we want. We want this candidate to ultimately take our job. Now let's re-engineer that backwards so we can see the steps in the process and where we're ultimately going to create momentum. Maybe one of the decisions is relocation. Still a big decision, but ultimately a little bit smaller than the final target. Maybe before that is an even easier decision to ultimately interview. And decision number one, which is a tiny decision, is getting them to respond to you when you first reach out to them. Now, this makes a ton of sense, and it seems like pre-closing, but let's take a look at the value associated with each one of these. What are you doing here to get after that initial response with your candidate to show them that you value your time. What price, what amount of time are you willing to put on this? Are you sending that person a thank you card after they've had that initial conversation with you? How important is that decision to you is a direct reflection of what you as the recruiter do after they actually respond here. Where are you creating the value? They agree to come in for an interview. What are you doing to continue creating value there for them? Are you sending them another thank you card? Are you sending them a gift basket from your organization? Yet I hear all the time, well, we don't have the money to do that. We spend all this money here on sourcing, but when it comes to creating the most important decisions, creating that momentum that ultimately tilts them in the direction of making a decision here, we stop investing. This is what old school salespeople did. They go right from identifying their prospect to closing the deal, ultimately missing the momentum that gets them there, making you susceptible to counteroffers, to declines, all of those other things. So what are you doing at each step? When they're thinking about relocation, yes, you can refer them off to a realtor to look at homes, but are you gathering information on the local schools for them? Where is the extra value add that you, both in time and your company in money, are willing to put on the decision here, starting with the smallest all the way to the biggest? We cannot stop creating value for our candidates. They have way too many options. We need to stop and understand how we can create additional value in each of these areas so that we can create this tilt that ultimately gets you to the target. Most recruiters that I speak with today do nothing to create value here, are not willing to spend dollars here to keep the momentum going. Think about sales organizations. The greater the decision, the higher the risk, the more they spend on that prospect to push them through the funnel. Yet on the recruiting side, it seems like we spend the money up to sourcing, but we forget to continue to invest and create value and then expect our candidates to make really big decisions. Do not forget the tilt. So thank you for being a part of this today. Keep coming back every week and we'll get a little bit more in terms of how we need to change as recruiters in light of the changes we're seeing in the economy. See you next week.